How the method of science is applied to the study of human psychology. So here I've taken a chunk of the presentation that we use in the study guide for this chapter, and we're going to walk through it with a specific example of how the scientific method was used to test a controversial claim within the domain of psychology. And that controversial claim was in the domain of the connection of vaccines and autism. So autism is a developmental disorder found in many children, an increasing number of children in the United States. And it's typically characterized by symptoms such as difficulty with social interactions, difficulty making eye contact with people, and it can range from fairly mild symptomology up to very serious symptomology. In the late 1990s, a paper was published which claimed that there was a connection between vaccines and the incidence of autism. Specifically, that there was a vaccine, the combined vaccine MMR, that had a preservative, thimerosal, that was causing an increased incidence of autism in the population. So what we're going to walk through is how the scientific method was used to test this claim. So the steps in the scientific method typically involve observing some phenomenon out in the environment, formulating hypotheses and predictions about that phenomenon, testing that through empirical research, drawing conclusions, and evaluating conclusions. And in the case of the autism vaccine story, some researchers had observed anecdotal evidence, that is not systematic data, wherein some children seem to be developing autism symptoms after having gotten the combined MMR vaccine. So they formulated a hypothesis that there was a connection between this. They made predictions based on this, and they tested it using a fairly small population of people who had had this vaccine and then developed autism symptomology. And from that, they drew the conclusions that the vaccine was causing autism. And then they published the results and put their conclusions out there for others to evaluate. Where we're going to focus our attention is the evaluation of these conclusions using the scientific method. So once this was placed out there in the scientific community for evaluation, the scientific community then took this study and evaluated it in terms of what would be the implications. If this claim were true, that vaccines cause autism, then there must be certain conclusions that we would have to derive from that. There would be predictions we'd be able to make from that, and we could test those predictions by looking at certain variables. So starting with the theoretical model that had been put forth by these researchers, that they explained the observation of some kids suffering from autism after the vaccine. They had explained it by saying that the vaccine caused the observations. Other scientists then tried to make predictions based on this body of research, and they did so by examining variables that would systematically vary according to this theoretical model. So, there were many researchers who went out and actually tested this theoretical model by formulating hypotheses, and we're going to focus here only on a small subset of those. One set of hypotheses that were derived from this theoretical claim was that if the vaccine were causing autism, then we should see increased rates of autism in different countries according to the different years when they implemented mandatory application of this vaccine. So this vaccine came into widespread use in different years in different countries. So if it were really the case that the vaccine is causing the autism, then we should see increasing rates of autism in different years in different countries according to when that vaccine was implemented on a widespread basis within those countries. So this is a hypothesis that different countries should show different rates of autism in different years according to when they implemented the autism vaccine on a widespread basis. So you can see that this hypothesis is derived from the theoretical claim of the original study, and that it is a prediction that can be tested. That is, we can go out and test it by gathering data in different countries of autism rates in different years before and after they implemented the autism vaccine on a widespread basis. And so this is a hypothesis that could lend credibility to the theory that vaccines cause autism if the data supported it, but could also undermine the theory if the data did not support it. And so this reflects the principle of falsifiability. That is, whatever we're testing, as we gather data, we have to accept that those data could potentially support or undermine our theoretical claim according to how they turn out. This is what makes it truly a test. If we weren't gathering data that could either support or undermine the claim, that is, if the data could only support the claim and didn't have the capacity to undermine the claim, then we wouldn't really be testing the hypothesis. But in the case of these predictions, they lend themselves to gathering of data that could theoretically support or undermine the claim depending on how the data turn out. And thus it is a falsifiable claim, and that's what makes it truly scientific. And so researchers went out and looked into this claim in many different locales within different countries in Europe and the United States. And fortunately, your textbook and the PowerPoint undermine the importance of operational definitions in doing this. The operational definition is the description of the variable that we're testing and the rules for how it will be measured. Well, in the case of studying autism, we have well-defined operational definitions. The scientific community has an accepted set of definitions of what symptoms constitute a diagnosis of autism, and therefore in different countries they use the same diagnostic criteria. So we had an operational description of the variable we're measuring, the incidence of autism, that is based on established scientific criteria. So our operational definition is, here's what autism is, and we're going to look at rates of diagnosis of autism in different countries. And based on those, that operational definition, we look at rates of autism both before and after the implementation of the combined vaccine in the different countries. So researchers went out and collected and analyzed these data across different cultures, and they drew conclusions. And what did the conclusions show? They showed that there was no increase in autism in these different countries according to when this vaccine was introduced in the different countries. That rates of autism diagnosis continued in a steady pattern as they had been doing before the introduction of this vaccine. So in all these countries, we were seeing steady increases in the diagnosis rates of autism, but the steady rate of increase seemed to have nothing to do with the introduction of the vaccine. That if the vaccine were really causing autism, then we would have seen some sort of blip. We would have seen some sort of defined increase in the rates of autism after the vaccine was introduced in these different countries. But we did not see such a pattern. The pattern was steady both before and after the introduction of the vaccine. And so what this told us is that the theory should be changed. Now, normally one study would not refute an entire theory, but in the case of the autism vaccine research, there were many studies that undermined this claim of a connection between vaccines and autism. And taken comprehensively, they quite strongly refuted the claim that vaccines were causing autism. These conclusions were evaluated and published and reviewed by other scientists, and the ultimate conclusion is that the original study that claimed a connection between the vaccines and autism was flawed, that it did not support this kind of theoretical model. So that's just one example of how the scientific method has been used to test a claim in psychology. And this is the ideal of how we conduct psychological science using the scientific method in many domains of study.